You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Howdy, music fans. Welcome to Modern Musicology. And guess what? This week it's just me and Anthony. Anthony, what's going on?
What's up?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I'm happy to be here and ready to talk.
Oh, yeah. Stephanie and Rob both have other engagements, so they are not with us, which means mommy and daddy are out of the house and the kids are going to throw a party.
Yes, we are. We're going to rage.
Rage. And this week we are talking about, and we're a few weeks late on this. Everybody else has covered this already, but that's okay. We're going to get into it. This week we are talking about the Rolling Stone list of the 250 greatest guitarists of all time. And I think it's safe to say we both have got some stuff to say about this list.
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to be interesting to hear each other's thoughts on this, and hopefully we'll get some chime in from some of the audience who also have thoughts about this list. And if you do, you can just email us at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or you can just drop a comment anywhere you see our post, socials, or wherever. All right. So to set this up, I am going to give the first word on this whole thing to Rolling Stone. This is from the introduction to the list. This is like a little 5-paragraph intro, and I'm going to read the second and third paragraph because I think it's very interesting, and it kind of gives you a sense of where they're going with this list. Rolling Stone published its original list of the 100 greatest guitarists in 2011. It was compiled by a panel of musicians, mostly older classic rockers. Our new expanded list was made by the editors and writers of Rolling Stone. This one goes to 250. So right there, they're telling you, we are not going to let the musicians establish this list anymore because we don't like what they did the first time.
And heaven forbid that people who actually play music for a living and know what a good guitarist is should have any say in this list.
Yes. Now, even at 250, there are a lot of things that probably should be represented on this list that aren't. And this is a little bit of where they're going. This is the third paragraph. Guitar players are often as iconic as lead singers for bands they play in, but mythic guitar gods like Jimmy Page, Brian May, and Eddie Van Halen are only part of the story. We wanted to show the scope of the guitar's evolution. The earliest entrant on the list, folk music icon Elizabeth Cotten, was born in 1893. The youngest, indie rock prodigy Lindsey Jordan, was born in 1999. The list has rock, jazz, reggae, country, folk, blues, punk, metal, disco, funk, bossa nova, rumba, flamenco, and much more. There are peerless virtuosos like Pat Metheny, Yvette Young, and Steve Vai, as well as primitivists like Johnny Ramone and Poison Ivy of the Cramps. There are huge stars like Prince, Joni Mitchell, and Neil Young, and behind-the-scenes masters like Memphis soul great Teenie Hodges and smooth rock assassin Larry Carlton. So one of the things that I think this list does really well is it covers a spectrum of guitar playing and guitar players from all different backgrounds, all different genres, all different nationalities and cultures. And I think that in that sense, this is a very successful list. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I can see what they were doing. I also think with Rolling Stone, and we've seen this in previous lists we've talked about, there's almost this desire to be a little bit controversial, to get people talking about it and to keep their name out there in the public consciousness and to keep Rolling Stone relevant. Honestly, I'm going to say about this what I said I think about a previous list, where I think most, if not quite all, of these artists deserve to be on here for one reason or the other. Maybe a few are questionable, but let's say 90% deserve to be on this list.
Yeah.
I would say where I disagree is where a lot of these artists end up in the ranking.
Yeah. And for me, I wasn't really that worried about placement on the list. I mean, let's just get into it. The list begins with Andy Summers of The Police at number 250. Like, there's 249 guitarists that they think are better than Andy, and he was only just good enough to barely squeak into the list.
Yeah.
That's nuts. But at the same time, he's on the list, and that's fine. Right. There's a lot of people that I really dig that are kind of like way down in the 1s and 200s, and that's okay. I mean, I'm not that bothered by it. It's in a lot of cases, some of the people that I think should have been on the list that aren't there in favor of some other people that might not should have been on the list. Like, as you say, there are some questionable entries.
Yeah. As I said, I think about 90% I would say deserve to be on the list.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. And, what's interesting is that a lot of times when they do these lists, it's not just about proficiency. It's about influence. It's about changing the course of, the progression of the instrument or of a genre of music or whatever. And there are ones on here that I don't think fit any of those criteria. So it's interesting that in their introduction to this list, they don't really say anything about criteria. They don't really say, we are looking for proficient guitar players. We're looking for technical excellence. We're looking for, lead players. I mean, there are people who are only rhythm guitar players, and that's good because I think that that's an important role that gets overlooked a lot. But it's just weird that they don't really specify how or why they rank the things that they rank. And there are people who you don't think of initially as guitar players. I don't know. Should they be there?
Yeah. And I think not giving criteria was fairly deliberate.
Oh, of course it was.
Because it makes it a lot harder for people to disagree with it when there's no actual criteria. If you say we're rating this solely on technical ability, you can say,
like Johnny Ramone.
Yeah, is Johnny Ramone really better than Steve Vai? No, fuck off. Of course he's not.
Right.
Like, I would definitely argue I don't think Johnny Ramone is top 50.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
In any criteria, I don't think he's top 50.
Yeah. And, part of it is they're writing on the influence and the importance of the band that these people are in, or maybe on the strength of the songs that they've written, not necessarily strictly guitar playing. So they do have a very weird method of putting and it's also very balanced, like the people that you would think of at the top of the list are interspersed with a lot of people that you don't think of as the top of the list. I mean, I'm not saying that Chuck Berry should not be on this list. He absolutely should be, but in the top 5, I don't know.
And I look at someone like Nile Rodgers, who comes in at 7th. And I love Nile Rodgers. I think he has been involved in a lot of great music.
Yeah.
But I think of his impact in production.
Yes.
Rather than necessarily guitar playing. So should he be top 10 in 250 greatest producers? Absolutely. Top 10 in 250 greatest guitarists? Questionable.
Yeah. And, I mentioned that I'm not too worried about individuals' placement on the list. But in this case, this is one of the ones that I absolutely had sort of highlighted. And that is that Nile Rodgers is at number 7 and Prince is 14. Now, I think it's important to represent African-American artists as guitar players, and both of them absolutely deserve a place on this list. And again, as you say, I love Nile Rodgers and I have an enormous amount of respect for him, but better than Prince? I mean, Prince is one of those players. First of all, he can play any instrument you give him and play it proficiently. Second of all, as a guitar player, he can play any style. He can play technically fast. He can play slow and emotive. He is just an incredibly gifted musician, and Nile is too, but a better guitar player than Prince? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, that, again, their lack of criteria.
Yeah.
It makes me think that they are taking in things beyond the guitar playing. And again, Nile Rodgers, he's an amazing, amazing producer. And I'm going to keep harping on this because I feel like this really is an example of where they have let his work beyond his guitar playing influence this.
Mm-hmm.
And I thoroughly, thoroughly disagree with that placement. I think he deserves a place on the list.
Yeah.
But he's not top 10.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. I remember, I think it was you when the list first came out and we first started looking at it, and you were like, oh, number 1 is Hendrix. Boring.
Yeah.
I mean, predictable, definitely.
Absolutely. Extremely, extremely predictable.
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, his guitar playing is hugely, hugely influential. You know, he really transformed how the instrument was played, particularly as a lead instrument.
Mm-hmm.
It's just predictable. I mean, it's hard to argue against beyond just saying, yeah, what are you adding to this? Like, I feel like every list ever has probably put, if not number 1, Hendrix is normally top 3.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. And usually 1. And it's almost like you're expected to do that, you know?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because it feels like they have gone out of their way to court controversy on some of these choices. But yet
sure.
they've gone for something so conventional as putting Hendrix as number 1. Like, oh, even we can't touch that.
Exactly.
Like, guys, you want to be ballsy, you want to make a statement, put Hendrix at like 30th and stick your middle fingers up at the world. If you want to play these games, play these fucking games, guys.
Yeah, go in on it. Exactly. So Hendrix was 1, Chuck Berry number 2, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin number 3. I'm not sure about that one. I mean, Led Zeppelin is an enormously influential band. I've never been a big fan of Page's playing. He's kind of a sloppy player. He's got a weird tone. But that's just me and my taste and my preferences. I don't know.
Well, you know my feelings about Led Zeppelin, so I'm not going to disagree with you. You and I have done panels on the Unholy Trinity, and my controversial hot take is, of the 3, Zeppelin were the weakest. So I'm not going to disagree with you on this.
Right. Number 4, and I'm not going to go through the entire list. I just wanted to get to number 4, Eddie Van Halen. Now, it's also kind of a cliche to put Eddie Van Halen at the top, you know, but at the same time, and, you know, maybe it's a difference in awareness. Maybe when Hendrix was on the scene, I just was too young and I wasn't really aware of the cultural impact. But Eddie Van Halen, when that first Van Halen album came out, that was like dropping an atom bomb. It changed everything. It changed the entire landscape of rock and roll. It changed the landscape of guitar playing. And a lot of that comes from Eruption, that solo guitar piece that leads into basically an intro to another song. But that showed the level of playing that Eddie Van Halen had, and guitar players everywhere sat around with their instruments and played that over and over and over and thought, how did he do this? I mean, I remember it specifically. I remember buying that album, and I remember every person I know. I remember in the press. I remember on television. It was everywhere. And Eddie, I think, is 100% deserving of a top 5 placement. And I just want to say that, you know, I'm not like arguing placement of every single person on this list. Eddie Van Halen, that was a game changer in a way that almost nobody else was.
You mentioned Eruption, and that's definitely a fuck off statement of virtuosity.
Yeah.
25 years later, I was in a band in high school, and we were centered around the fact that for a 15-year-old, our guitarist was absurdly good.
Yeah.
And that was our statement piece, was he could play Eruption.
Oh, wow.
So we would start our... We never actually played any shows before we all started hating each other. But we would kick off our rehearsals, our planned set list with Eruption. He would have just come out, play on his own, played Eruption was the vision. And then as he was getting towards the end of it, the rest of us would have walked on stage and just given him the spotlight to say, this guy's amazing. And the fact that, 25 years later after Eruption came out, teenage kids were using it as a statement piece, I think says everything you need to know.
Yeah. What are some of the other ones from the Rolling Stone list that you either liked or disliked as far as inclusion or placement?
I think Tom Morello's placed too high.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I love Morello. I think he's a phenomenal dude. And I think hugely influential and a great player, but maybe not number 18.
No. I think Gilmour, May, and Knopfler are all too low.
Oh, I knew you would think that Knopfler was too low.
Yeah, I mean, he was somewhere in the 90s. Get out of here, Rolling Stone. Get out of here. Knopfler is... If you've ever seen Knopfler live, you know how good he is, because everything he does, he plays fingerstyle.
Yeah.
He doesn't use a pick. And good God, if you have seen Knopfler's solo band play Telegraph Road live, you would not place him in the 90s. He would be top 10, and he is in my top 10.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Although I knew he would be.
I think Eric Clapton is a phenomenal guitarist, but he's also a trash bag of a human being, and so doesn't deserve a place on the list because of that.
Well, that's a big statement.
Yeah, I just don't want to give him any attention or credibility. He can fuck off. I'm giving some hot takes today.
You are wound up, buddy. I love it.
What else? I might actually bump John Mayer higher. I don't think he's top 10, but I think he's probably somewhere in the 40s on my list, maybe the 30s.
Yeah. He's a great guitar player and hugely soulful and just emotive. And I love his playing. And similar is, and he's way down on the list, but Keith Urban, because you just think of Keith Urban as a pop country kind of guy, but when you hear him play, Jesus, he's good. And there was a special on TV that had John Mayer and Keith Urban, and they sort of did a long bluesy kind of thing where they just traded licks, and it was mesmerizing. So I would have both of them a little higher on the list.
I don't think Kurt Cobain deserves a place on the list.
I thought that was kind of strange.
Again, another hot take that I have been saying for 20 odd years is I think it's not because he's great. I think it's because he's dead.
Well, I mean, he did get a lot of the accolades while he was still alive, and the impact that he had was while he was still alive. So
I do wonder, though, if he had not taken his life and Nirvana had carried on, if the legacy would be anything what it is.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a possibility.
I'm going to put Buckingham with Clapton in that he's a trash human being and doesn't deserve any attention.
Now, I don't know if I can go along with that. I mean, he's not a great guy, but I am going to separate the person from the playing, and they both deserve on the list as far as I'm concerned. And Buckingham is a unique player and has a style and a talent that nobody else has, and I would put him higher because he's 110, which is not bad.
Yeah, and I'm apparently in a salty mood today. You know, normally I say you can separate the art from the artist in all but the most egregious circumstances. I guess today I'm just feeling salty about something, and so taking it out on them. I think as players, they deserve their placement, and potentially deserve to be a little higher. I
Mm-hmm.
just think they're terrible people.
Well, Stevie would agree with you on one of those, at least. But speaking about placement, as I said, I'm not too worried about placement on the list. However, there is one that I do question, and that is, since we're talking about Lindsey Buckingham, he's at number 110. And another of my absolute favorites, Nancy Wilson, is 103. Now, I don't think Nancy should be higher than Lindsey Buckingham. I mean, I love Nancy, and the fact that she influenced an entire generation of women guitar players is enormous. But the technical ability, the songwriting, the feel, everything of Buckingham should not be that low and should not be under Nancy Wilson. That's just crazy to me.
I mean, Slash is under Nancy Wilson.
I know.
Very close in placement. But
I'm not trashing Nancy. I think she really is a great player, but there's just a difference in the world that they exist in, I think.
And I honestly wish that Rolling Stone had said, maybe with the exception of the top 10, the placement doesn't matter.
Yes.
Because I feel like what they have done is they have tried to get a balance of gender as well as race.
Yes, without
and make
a doubt.
sure there's a lot of representation. The problem is when you actually rank them, if you're using that as a criteria, I feel like you're really screwing over the integrity of actually ranking them based on ability, influence, etc.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Because that shouldn't come into that. So I think what they should have done is, rather than ascribe numbers, had a numberless list and say, these are who we think are the 250 best. There is no actual ranking here. And I think this would have been a much more, just put it alphabetical or something.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. That said, Steve Jones, get out of here. He doesn't, he's not. While the Sex Pistols were, undoubtedly a hugely influential band.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the guitar playing that made them so.
Yes.
I think it was the attitude and
absolutely
the shock factor, and the fact that no one else was out and out saying, this is who we are, this is what we stand for, anarchy in the UK, fuck you. It had very little to do with the actual guitar playing. So,
oh no, I mean, they could barely play instruments.
Yeah, top 250, get out of here.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a whole list of people that aren't on the list that he doesn't even stack up against. So
right.
I want to go back up a little higher on the list. And I want to ask you about number 13, and that's Iommi. What do you think about that placement? Do you think that, obviously he deserves the list, but is 13 too low, too high? What is it?
Look, Tony Iommi, I don't care what people say about Deep Purple, about Led Zeppelin, about Iron Butterfly, or even the Kinks or the Beatles. Tony Iommi invented heavy metal.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That sound that almost every metal band since has taken influence from started with that first Black Sabbath album.
Yes, and that first track. Nothing was as huge and game-changing as that first track.
And so I think that's low. I think if you're talking influence, I would argue he's more influential than Jimmy Page. I would argue he's probably up there with Hendrix in terms of influence. He's not a virtuoso player, but he was never meant to be.
Right.
He's not Randy Rhoads in terms of sheer technical ability, but holy shit. His ability to craft a riff that is just so utterly doom-laden. He's so good at that. And again, every metal band since has taken influence from that sound.
Mm-hmm.
So 13th, I feel that's a bit low.
Interesting. You know what? One of the things that this list does, and I don't think there's that many examples of it, and that is guitar duos. And they do a great job of capturing the fact that two guitar players that work in tandem are, a unique and important factor in what we hear in rock music. And they have a few really good examples of it. Now, at number 23, Hetfield and Hammett, I don't really think of them as a guitar duo. They're a lead player and a rhythm player. just like
But-
every other band has.
And I was actually watching a Metallica documentary during the week while I was working. I had it on in the background, and it was interesting because it was talking about the recording of, I think it was Load and Reload, and how Hetfield went out of the studio for a bit for, I don't know, family reasons or something. And while he was away, Hammett laid down some rhythm for the first time ever.
Yeah.
You know, they really did operate in a very up until that period of the band in a strict vacuum of one is the lead, one is the rhythm.
Yeah.
And I feel like when they were doing that, they both had very distinct roles, but you never had one without the other.
Yeah.
So I can buy that. I can buy Hetfield and Hammett as a duo. I think the one I struggle with a bit, when I think Radiohead, and I'm not the world's biggest Radiohead fan, but I do enjoy them, so I'm going to caveat this. But I don't think of Ed O'Brien ever with Radiohead. I think Johnny Greenwood. So I would question them as a duo coming in at 43rd.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
And I would also question Adrian Smith and Dave Murray from Iron Maiden at 83rd.
Yeah.
Because I think I think Adrian Smith's best work as a guitar player came outside of Iron Maiden and outside of working with Dave Murray. I think, you know, those duos are when they are virtually inseparable.
Yes.
That's the place for that. I would argue Tipton and Downing, while they don't work together anymore.
Yes, I was just going to say that very thing. I think that's one of the things that I think of as a guitar duo.
Yeah, and you listen to something like The Sentinel, where they literally trade off solos, and it's ridiculous. They are literally dueling against each other with their guitars, and it's so good.
And they're placed on this list at 219.
Yeah, get out of here. Get out of here. And when we get into our personal top 10s, I think you can tell mine is going to be very heavy on white dudes who play hard rock and heavy metal. So I'm definitely one of the ones that they really wanted to not be listened to.
Yeah, you're part of the problem.
I am.
Since I'm looking at that part of the list, 219 is where Tipton and Downing are. 216 is Steve Hackett. And I think that's an interesting placement. And I think that, I'm not sure. He, as a solo artist, I think you see a lot more of what he does as a guitar player. But, you know, most people think of him as a member of Genesis. And I think as a member of Genesis, he adds so much color and so much virtuosity, and his compositional skill is there. And I think that he is just a genius player. I'm not saying that he needs to be higher than 216. I think that is low, but I don't care. He's on the list, and that's the important thing to me.
Yeah, it does feel a bit low to me. Even his work with Genesis. I mean, you watch those videos where he's playing a double-headed guitar, you know, a 16-string and a 6-string, and just his sheer ability to switch between the two. And there's that Shepperton video that was recently remastered into 4K.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's not strutting his stuff. He's never been that kind of flair player. He sits there. He's a bit like Fripp. He sits there, who I also think is placed too low on this.
Yes, agreed.
But he sits there, and he just does what he does damn well. And yeah, I think he's probably a bit low on this.
That solo of his in the outro of Firth of Fifth is so astoundingly good. And everything that he does in Supper's Ready just blows my mind. He is just, I think he's amazing.
I mean, candidly, what everyone does in Supper's Ready is just ridiculous.
Well, that's true. That's true. And that's part of the thing, is that he is part of a unit where everyone is a virtuoso.
Right. And, you know, the ability to do that entire Apocalypse in 9/8 section.
Oh, my God.
Just get out of here. No one can do that. That's insane.
Exactly.
That's my apparent phrase of this episode, is get out of here.
Apparently. Number 229, somebody that I'm wholly unfamiliar with, and that is Barbara Lynn. And from reading up on her, she was a 60s R&B singer-songwriter, which I think is really great. That one of the things that I've liked about this list is that it introduced me to people that I don't know and might not have ever been exposed to before. So I'm looking forward to going and looking up some of Barbara Lynn's stuff and see what she's like, see what her songwriting is, see what her guitar playing is like. I'm very much looking forward to diving into that. But one of the things that it made me think of, and that is, the inclusion of African-American artists on this list, which I think they do a great job of representing here.
Mhm.
There's a couple that I immediately thought of that may have been, at least at the time that they were active, had more success, were more prominent on the scene than maybe Barbara Lynn was. I don't know. I'll have to go back and do more research about Barbara Lynn. But there was a band in the 70s in the disco era called Taste of Honey. And they were led
Okay.
by two women, Janice Marie Johnson, who was a bass player, and Hazel Payne, who was a guitar player. And first of all, in disco, you didn't see a lot of instrumentalists. It was all vocalists with a backing band. So these
Right.
ladies were right up front, but they were also really good players. And I would have more been interested in seeing them on the list than maybe Barbara Lynn. But then again, once I learn more about Barbara Lynn, maybe I'll change my opinion on that. But I think those Taste of Honey ladies, I mean, I remember the songs, they had a couple of hit songs in the 70s, and I thought, okay, well, this is okay. But I saw them on TV, and then I found out that the two ladies weren't just the vocalists, that they were the instrumentalists who were leading the band, and they were really good. I was so impressed with their playing. So I think that they should have maybe been included here.
I do think there were some interesting choices that were made in the name of diversity to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be careful because
Yes.
I realize I am a straight white guy saying that. One who I do think should have been flat out excluded, again, for being a fucking terrible human being.
Oh, I know who
Was
it is.
Ike Turner.
Yes, Ike Turner. I know.
I
thought about that.
I can rationalize the two I previously mentioned, Clapton and Buckingham,
Yes.
a lot more easily than I can Ike Turner.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that comes back to haunt me is that quote about him justifying himself and saying, I never laid a hand on her before we were married. Dude,
Yeah.
that's not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, that's when I'm very, very uncomfortable with being on here.
Yes. And, I talked about that whole thing, separating the art from the artist. I don't think in that case I would be willing to do it. I do think he is trash, and I do think that he should just be, forgotten from the conversation.
It comes down to what I said earlier about how egregious it was.
Yeah.
And I think someone like Buckingham, there's a very strange, weird narrative around him.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he was pretty shitty to Stevie for a long time, and yet she was still willing to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I think there's a lot going on there in that relationship that we as the general public are not privy to.
Yeah.
I don't see that level of complexity with Ike.
Right.
His case seems a lot more straightforward to me, and just, again,
Yes.
no.
Yes.
No, he shouldn't be here.
African Americans on the list.
Yes.
Number 233, her. Dude, she is amazing.
I don't know her.
Really?
Yeah. So that's someone I need to look into?
Yes. She is a powerhouse, not just as a guitarist, but as a songwriter, as a performer, as just a presence on the scene. And she kind of came out of nowhere. All of a sudden she was everywhere, and deservedly so. Yes, she is. And deservedly so, because she is a genuine talent. She is just phenomenal.
I need to look her up because I feel like so much of the modern music scene is not guitar driven, and so to have
Exactly.
a young African American woman making guitar driven R&B in
Yeah.
2023 is really different and interesting. So yeah, thank you for that tip. I will definitely look her up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she is something else. Man, I just love her. I'm a fan. I want to go to the illustration that they used as sort of their cover image for this, because I
Yeah,
think it's very, very interesting, because you have a wide range of people on this list. And some of the ones that you would expect to be featured in this image, like Hendrix and Eddie, are not there. And
right.
who is front and center, the big image right at the middle of this collage? And that is Yvette Young.
Mm-hmm.
And now she kind of came up as a YouTube sensation and has since formed a band called Covet. And she is unbelievable. She plays guitar like a virtuosic piano player plays a piano. She's sort of on the Eddie Van Halen level as far as innovating and doing something that nobody else can do. And first of all, on the list, she's kind of low. I mean, she's on the list, so that's important. She's kind of low on the list, and I think that's okay, because she's still young. She's still very much early in her career, and I think she has a lot of influence to come. But I'm going to say, featuring her as the centerpiece of this collage, of this image, is a big statement.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this collage, and again, having her front and center, is that the statement here is diversity.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
This is making a statement about this list
It
as a
absolutely
whole.
is. This is advertising to you. This is what you're going to expect.
Exactly.
This is not a straight white guy list.
Which is gonna rub a lot of people up the wrong way immediately, because people make the assumption, it must be those classic and hard rock and heavy metal virtuosos, which I will admit is where my mind immediately goes as well.
Yes.
Because that's what I mostly listen to.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got Prince there, you've got Sister Rosetta Thorpe, you've got
Yes.
Santana.
Yes.
Right? It's a very diverse group, and
diverse in terms of style and genre.
Oh, absolutely.
As much as, because you've got people from different nationalities, different styles of music. It's just as diverse musically as it is culturally.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I absolutely applaud them on this. And I think that this image says so much about what this list is going to be once you start reading down the list. Yvette Young is number 155 on the list, so she's kind of middling, And I think that it's interesting to feature her as the centerpiece of this image when she is, I mean, she's not top 10, she's not top 50, anything like that. I just think it's an interesting statement that they're making here. Like, she is the future of guitar playing almost.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with that necessarily. I mean, she is a wunderkind, she is just one of those prodigies that has a lot of talent, a lot of future, and I'm excited to see where she goes from here.
And I was reading up on her, and what's really interesting is she taught herself guitar by ear. She does not read music, and the result of that is kind of like what you saw with Hendrix, who also did not read music.
Mm-hmm.
It's someone coming in and playing very unconventionally.
Yeah.
And doing it well. I mean,
yes.
To your point, she's not someone I immediately think of, but I suspect in 30 years' time, people are going to be talking about the amount of influence that she has had on guitar playing.
I hope so. I hope she really does have that kind of career and that kind of impact, because she's just remarkable.
Yeah. Let's see. There was another one I wanted to touch on before we moved on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Someone I thought was also surprisingly low was Nita,
Oh, yeah.
129th.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch her guitar playing and she is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And again, is she really lower than Kurt Cobain? No, of course not.
Of course not.
Of course not. I mean, come on. But I almost wonder whether the fact that she plays hard rock and metal counted against her in this list, right? We've got some of the more obvious ones higher up. You've got Iommi, you've got Randy Rhoads, you've got Morello and Hetfield and Hammett, kind of all top 25.
Yeah.
I'm almost wondering if she was the victim of, well, we can't have too much of this style too high up the list.
No, I think that might be absolutely the reason. I think that they are keeping every section of the list as different and diverse as possible.
Which again makes me think, don't put rankings on these people. List them alphabetically and just say these are who we think the top 250.
Yes.
Done. It would be a lot harder to disagree with this list if they had done that.
Agreed. But then it doesn't get as many people talking.
Yeah, which, is kind of Rolling Stone's MO these days.
Oh, of course.
Trying to stay relevant by being controversial.
Yeah. There's a couple of other people that I really want to point out. One of them came in at number 247, and that is Ricky Wilson of the B-52s. First of all, I'm surprised to see him on the list, because I don't think that, you don't think of the B-52s as a guitar band, as a guitar-driven band.